Hello, patrons, and welcome to this week's Q&A. And the questions for this week are very topical because they have to do with some things that are currently going on in the world, the Iran conflict. And it's so topical, in fact, that I'm going to shortly release this Q&A video to the free feeds because, again, I think it's something that people are concerned about and they want to know about. So I will say hello, non-patrons. Well, hello to those who are just listening here on YouTube and Rumble and X and Facebook and all the other places that I post my videos to for free. If you want to get these videos, these question and answer videos, and my bonus videos, please consider becoming a patron by going to patreon.com/faithbyreason. And you sign up there, you'll get, again, bonus videos, content when it first comes out, and these Q&As as well. And you can also be a part of the Bible study. So the question for this week is again about the Iran conflict and how it fits into Bible prophecy. So the question I got, and it was from our Bible study from earlier in the week. It is, what is current Israel's role in Bible prophecy? And will the current conflict with Iran lead to the Gog Magog conflict, or does it indicate the beginning of the Gog Magog conflict? So these are really good questions that we'll dive into. So first, I just want to be upfront that geopolitics is not really my expertise. Yes, I know a good deal about it, but I have not done deep study and deep research into it. So I'm not going to speak definitively about what's going on in geopolitics because, again, it's not my expertise. And I'm always critical of people who do not have an expertise in the Bible or in eschatology coming onto YouTube and whatever other platforms and making these broad, sweeping statements about their theories on what's happening in the world from a biblical perspective. So it would be hypocritical of me to do the same thing for geopolitics. So I'm not going to talk about this from much of a geopolitical standpoint because it's not my expertise. My expertise is in eschatology and Bible prophecy. So we're going to look at what's going on currently with Israel from that standpoint. So let's start with the first part of the question. Modern day Israel, the current nation of Israel, and how it relates to Bible prophecy. There is a wide divergence about the importance of Israel in general and modern Israel, the nation that began in 1948, as far as what it means for Bible prophecy. There are those on the extreme of one end, like the Christian Zionists, who say that the modern state of Israel is vitally important to Bible prophecy, that it is, in fact, the God's biblical time clock for Bible prophecy. And that's believed by people who I know and respect, people like my former mentor, the late great Chuck Missler, people like John Hagee, and a lot of the modern Bible prophecy folk are very, very into looking at the modern state of Israel as God's prophetic time clock, and they pay very close attention to what's going on in Israel and how it relates to the end times, the tribulation, the judgments there, the second coming of Christ, the rapture, all that stuff, and how we treat Israel and our biblical mandate for how we treat Israel. That we are mandated by God to support Israel and all that they do because Israel, they're God's chosen people. The descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the chosen ones, and we should support them and we should always be on their side. On the other hand, there are people on the far extreme of the other end who say that Israel isn't very important. Israel in general, or in modern Israel, are not important in biblical prophecy because the church has replaced Israel. These are folks who are called the replacement theologists. Replacement theology is the idea that the church has replaced Israel, that Israel is no longer that important to God, and that the church has taken their place. So we should focus on the church as far as Bible prophecy is concerned. And Israel, it exists, but it's not very important. And there's also a fringe aspect of that called the 10 lost tribes, who we'll talk about in a bit as well. So the two extremes. And the problem is, anytime you're dealing with folks with extreme views, there are going to be flaws. And both of these ideas, Christian Zionism as well as replacement theology, have serious flaws that we're going to dive into now. So let's start with replacement theology. What is replacement theology? Well, as I said before, and as the name implies, replacement theology is the idea that the church has replaced Israel, that when Jesus was rejected by the Jewish leadership, God rejected them. And he said that you guys are no longer my people and they've been replaced by the church, and that the church has inherited all of the promises of Israel. And again, there's a fringe side of this, as I said before, called the 10 lost tribes theory. That they go even further. They say that not only is modern Israel basically irrelevant to prophecy, that they're not even the true Jews, which is a whole other thing. But their idea is that the true Jews are actually this mysterious 10 lost tribes. And I've done a whole video on the 10 lost tribes, and I'll have it available. Actually, yeah, it should be available. If you're on YouTube, you should see the link pop up there, but I'll also put it in the show notes. So what is the idea of the 10 lost tribes? I want to take care of that first, then we'll get back to all of replacement theology, because again, the 10 lost tribes is a fringe aspect of that. So the 10 lost tribes aspect, and again, I don't believe it. I've debunked it pretty well before, but I'll just tell you what it is. It is the idea that when Israel had its civil war and there was a split between the 10 northern tribes and the two southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin, the 10 northern tribes decided to go into idolatry. That's why they split up. They didn't want to worship God, the God of the Bible, Yahweh, Jehovah, anymore. They wanted to go after the false gods of Molech and Baal and Dagon and all the rest of them. And so they split. And God warned them through the prophets like Elijah, Elisha, and Jeremiah and several others. And he said, if you keep going after these false gods, you will be punished. They didn't listen, and God did punish them. He sent the Assyrian Empire, which was a dominant empire at the time, to come in and take them. He took over, obviously they took over northern Israel, and they took the Israelites into Assyria. And as the 10 lost tribes mythology goes, once they were in Assyria, they dispersed and they lost their identity. All of them somehow managed to migrate to Northern Europe, where they magically transformed from Middle Eastern Hebrew Israelites into blonde haired, blue eyed, or red haired, green eyed Caucasians, because, that's how genetics work. And they also became Protestants later on. And as Protestants, they also became the Puritans. And they became the Puritans, who were the pilgrims who landed in America in 1620. And they became America. So America is the new Israel, and Americans are the new Israelites. Well, not all Americans, just white Americans. So you can see how that can be problematic. So, no, this is not correct. This is actually completely ridiculous. It is ridiculous historically, biblically, and of course, genetically. So just briefly, again, as I said, I talked about this before, but just to briefly debunk it. First of all, yes, the Assyrian Empire did take the 10 northern tribes captive, but they only took half of them captive. They had a rule where the Assyrians would take half of their conquered people into Assyria, but then they would take other people they conquered and put them into the previous land and integrate them with the folks they left behind in order to decrease nationalism. And that's where the Samaritans came from. The Samaritans were the people who were the descendants of Israelites and non-Israelites who the Assyrians had brought in to northern Israel. And they were considered less than Jews. They were considered like half breeds, basically, which is why when Jesus gave the parable of the Good Samaritan, it was so scandalous because he made a Samaritan, which was considered a lower class person, the hero of that parable, and people didn't like that. So half of them were never lost because they stayed in Israel. What happened? What about the other half? Did they disperse and go to Europe? No. They were in the Assyrian Empire. Then the Assyrians were conquered by the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar. So now those 10 lost tribes were now all in Babylon. Babylon also conquered the southern tribes. So now all 12 tribes were conquered by Babylon. They were all in the Babylonian Empire. Then the Babylonian Empire was conquered by the Persians. So now all 12 tribes are in the Persian Empire. And then the Persian king Cyrus allowed the Israelites to go back to their land. So now all 12 tribes were allowed to go back to Israel. All 12. And we know that they went back and they retained their identity because 400 years after this, in the book of Acts, chapter 2, on the day of Pentecost, when the apostle Peter is speaking and preaching about Jesus to the folks who had come to Israel to celebrate Pentecost, he said directly, blatantly, that he is speaking to the entire house of Israel. All of them. The 10 northern tribes are called the house of Israel. The two southern tribes are called the house of Judah. Peter specifically says the house of Israel, meaning that those 10 so-called lost tribes, 400 years after they were allegedly lost, knew how to get back to Israel for Pentecost. They were never lost. So that's ridiculous. And of course, you're not going to just transform genetically into a completely different race. So anyway, not going to go any more into that. If you really want to get into it, then look at the video I did on the so-called 10 lost tribes. But let's talk about the replacement theology aspect. The problem is that it's not biblical. Not only is it not biblical, it directly contradicts the Bible because the Bible says in the book of Romans, Paul spends Romans chapters 9, 10, and 11 hammering home the fact that God is not done with Israel. Yes, there were consequences to them rejecting their Messiah. They were blinded. God said that specifically, directly. They were blinded. He said, because you did not know the time of your visitation, all these things were hidden from you. Jesus said that himself in the Gospels. But then Paul says that this blindness is not permanent. Especially in Romans chapter 11, he says that blindness is temporary until the times of the Gentiles, us, the church, is complete. The tribulation that last 7 years of God dealing with the world, the last 7 years of human and in the rule of evil over the earth, which we call the tribulation, is very, very germane to the Jews. There are two reasons for the tribulation. Reason number one is for God to punish spiritual evil. Reason number two is for the Israel to be driven to the wall and to be afflicted so harshly that they will finally accept their Messiah. Again, Paul says this very blatantly. Romans 9, 10, and 11 is that eventually the Jews will accept their Messiah. Israel will finally accept him when they are afflicted. We see this in the book of Hosea, where it says, where God says, I will return to my place, which means he must have left it. That's Jesus. He left his place. He says, I will return to my place until they acknowledge their offense. What offense? Rejecting the Messiah. He says, in their affliction, they will seek me earnestly. They will realize their rejection and they will weep because they have been wrong for 2,000 years. And then they will call for their Messiah to come back. And then 3 days later, he will. I'm not going to go into the details of that. I talk about it in my Revelation series. So replacement theology is absolutely wrong. It is not biblical. It contradicts the Bible. God is not done with Israel. There are promises to Israel that have not yet been fulfilled, and God must fulfill his promises. Otherwise, he would not be righteous and just, which means he would not be God if he doesn't fulfill his promises to Israel. So those things will happen. How does that affect the modern state of Israel? We'll talk about that in a second, but I want to talk about the other extreme, and that is the Christian Zionists. So what is Christian Zionism? Well, as I said previously, those are folks who take the exact opposite take of the replacement theologists, that Israel is not just relevant to prophecy, that they are the key to prophecy, including modern Israel. So in 1948, they look at the creation of this new Jewish state as the fulfillment of Ezekiel chapter 37, which is the dry bones prophecy, wherein it states that, well, God gives a prophecy to Ezekiel about these, dry bones that are, on the ground, and they were virtually fossilized. And he said, can these dry bones live? And he tells Ezekiel to preach to the dry bones, to prophesy to them. And as Ezekiel obeyed this, these bones became living. They had flesh came upon them. They started walking around, but they didn't have any life or any breath or any spirit, ruach, in them. And then Ezekiel preached again, and the Ruach, the Spirit, was given back to them. And God interpreted this to Ezekiel as he said that he would gather Israel back from all the nations of the world, and he would give them not life, and they would be his people again, and they would be in his land again, and they would be one nation, be in Israel, and they will have a king over them like David, who will rule them. So this is millennial. We're talking about the rule of Jesus. So this dry bones prophecy seems to lend itself to being fulfilled, or will be fulfilled during the millennial reign, or as a part of the millennial reign, which means it's yet future, because the millennium is future, despite what our friends who believe in the little season say. And I have a whole series, a whole thing on the little season. I have videos on it. I have a book out for it, which you'll be able to get on faithbyreason.net or on my Patreon and on Amazon. So pick up that book if you're curious about the little season and my take on it. In any case, the Christian Zionists take this dry bone prophecy as having to do with the establishment of Israel in 1948, where they where the nation of Israel was formed, but was reformed in a day. as we see in Isaiah chapter 66. It says, can a nation be formed in a day? And he says, can a woman give birth without any labor pains after being dead for a while? And it was basically dead for 2,000 years, since 70 AD, when Israel was literally wiped off the map by the Romans during the Roman-Jewish War. 2,000 years later, roughly a little less than 2,000 years later, you have Israel coming back, well, literally from the dead, but it said the spirit wasn't in them. So they're alive, but they don't have the spirit, the Ruach, the spirit of God. They're secular. And the nation of Israel currently is, mostly secular. There obviously is religious aspects to it, but they don't have the spirit in that they don't believe in their Messiah, in Jesus. So the Zionists, the Christian Zionists, believe that Israel is now in the state where they are alive, but they don't have the breath of life. That will happen when once they believe in Jesus, which will happen yet future. So they look at this as a fulfillment of prophecy. And there's also the fig tree prophecy in Matthew chapter 24, where Jesus says, learn the parable of the fig tree. When you see the fig tree putting forth its leaves and it's about to fruit, then you know that we are that the end is near, even at the door. So Christian Zionists believe that the nation of Israel is a sign that we are in the very last stages of the end times, which means that the tribulation and the rapture and the return of Jesus are on our doorstep. And since the Israelites are God's chosen people, then and they are so important in prophecy that as Christians, the Christian Zionists believe that we should support Israel in a blanket way. We should give blanket support to Israel. We shouldn't criticize them. We should not say anything bad about them. And they use the mandate that God gave to Abraham in the book of Genesis, where God says to Abraham and his progenitors, or his descendants rather, that I will bless them that bless you and curse them that curse you. And they take this to mean that you should only speak positively towards Israel, towards the Jewish people, and you'll be blessed. And of course, if you don't, then you will be cursed. And then you throw in things like the Schofield Bible, which is very controversial these days. It's actually become kind of a stalking horse for some people who take an extreme anti-Jewish take, and that anti-Jewish take is becoming pretty prevalent. And interestingly, it seems to be echoed a lot by people who have a Catholic bent. There are certain conservative pundits who are hyper-Catholic, people like Candace Owens, who is very anti-Israel for her own reasons. And I'm not saying that all of her reasons are incorrect when she's talking about the things that are going on with modern Israel and some of the things they're doing. But I think there's an agenda there. Something about her I just don't trust, especially because she's suddenly become so hyper Catholic over the last 4 or 5 years. And then you have Michael Knowles, who's a more moderate, but he's still in that vein. And I find that there's a lot of Catholic influence in the current administration. J.D. Vance and a lot of the people in the cabinet are, which I find interesting. But in any case, the Schofield Bible is it's not, and this is what's kind of annoying when people say the Schofield Bible, because they make it seem like C.I. Schofield wrote a different version of the Bible. No, the Schofield Bible, as it were, it was just a regular Bible, King James derivative Bible, and the only difference is it has study notes that C.I. Schofield wrote. And our argument is that C.I. Schofield was funded by Zionist interests, and his notes were very pro-Israel. And so be it. I'm not going to get into all that because honestly, I don't own a Schofield Bible. I think I've read it before, but I don't own one, and it's a commentary. So what? Those are just C.I. Schofield's ideas about the Bible. He did not rewrite the Bible and make it pro-Jewish. He put in notes, and you can read his notes if you want and take them for what they are, but they're just the notes of a human being. They're not from God. So if you don't like his notes, then don't accept them. If you think they're too pro-Israel, then you can reject them. But it's not about his notes. It's about what the Bible actually says. So that again, that's why I say the Schofield Bible idea is a stalking horse that people use to denigrate modern Christianity. And let's just look at what the Bible says, not what someone who comments on the Bible says. Nevertheless, Christian Zionists or people or Christians who have a Zionist bent, they just believe we can't say anything bad about Israel, and they're always pro-Israel and anti-Israel's enemies. So, what are the flaws in this idea? Well, first of all, no one is beyond criticism. No people, no nations are beyond criticism because we're all humans and we all make mistakes. Whether you are a Jew or a Gentile, we all make mistakes nationally and individually. That includes Israel. And how do I know that's not a mistake to criticize what Israel and Israelites and Jewish people do? Because God did it throughout the Old Testament. Half of the Old Testament is God being ticked off at Israel for screwing up. The Israelites were constantly screwing up over and over again. From the time they left Egypt, when they were still in Egypt, they were messing up, worshiping false gods, being stubborn, rebelling against God, and God getting angry with them. God promised, actually, God told Moses right after he liberated them from Egypt in the Exodus, and they were worshiping the golden calf. God said, I'm gonna wipe these people out, and I'll just start a new nation with you, Moses. And Moses talks him out of it. And then you go on and on throughout the books of Joshua and Judges and First and Second Kings and Chronicles and all of the prophets. Israel kept messing up, and God said some of the most harsh things about them. He did not. He said blatantly that he did not choose the Israelites to be his people because they were superior to anyone else or because they were better. He actually says the opposite. He says, I chose you because you were the lowest of people. You are a stubborn and stiff-necked people. Stiff-neck is in the polite King James. It means you guys are a bunch of jerks. I chose you because you were the biggest screw-ups around. Why? Because God was basically saying, if I can make these degenerates my people, then there's hope for anyone. So if criticizing Israel makes you an anti-Semite, then God is probably the biggest anti-Semite in creation because he said some of the worst things about them and he did some of the worst things to them through his punishments, which they deserved. The other thing is that it is possible that Ezekiel 37 was fulfilled during the time of the release by the Persian Empire. Remember, Ezekiel was writing uh, Ezekiel 30, chapter 37, which what we call chapter 37, during the Babylonian captivity. And it said, and God said that he would bring them back. And you could argue that that was fulfilled when Cyrus the Persian allowed the Jews to come back to Israel. Now, granted, there is a portion of that, a second part of that, because I think that Ezekiel 37 prophecy is really in two parts because one is that he would just bring them back. And then there's a second part where God tells Ezekiel to make a stick and write the name of Ephraim and another stick to write the name of Judah. And Ephraim represented the northern empire, the northern tribes rather, and Judah represented the southern tribe. And he said, take these two sticks, join them together, and they will become one. And that's what happened. And then he says that's when he says that he will have a ruler like David rule over them. And that appears to be millennial. So this could be the same prophecy in two parts. The first fulfillment of the dry bones was when the Jews were allowed to go back to their homeland after the Babylonian captivity. And then the second part is another regathering of them in the latter days as part of the millennium, which would be, at least 7 years from now. So that doesn't necessarily mean that this current nation is part of that prophecy, because if you look at how the current nation of Israel came into being, yeah, it seemed miraculous. It did come back in a day. And again, was that verse in Isaiah 66, was it speaking literally of a nation coming back in one day, or was it more metaphorical? You could argue both ways. And you can, and if you look at the way this nation came into being, there was a lot of machinations going on in the background by people who were not really godly. It could be that this nation was brought back to fulfill some of the machinations that the evil ones want. Because remember that the fallen angels, Satan in particular, they want to have possession of this land because it's God's chosen land. When the Israelites were in Egypt for 400 years, what did the fallen angels do with their proxies? They invaded the land of Canaan, the promised land, and they occupied it, and they had to be physically removed by the Israelite armies. So Satan covets that land. So could it be that the people who are there now were not put there by God, but they were part of a satanic deception? Maybe. I don't know. I truly don't. And again, it could be possible that this was all God doing it. And if that's the case, then I don't want to denigrate that, but I don't think it's cut and dried, especially in light of a lot of the actions that they've taken over the last 50, 60, 70, 80 years. So let's just keep all that in mind. And lastly, as long as we're being controversial about this sort of thing, There is also the question of whether the people who are physically occupying Israel right now are Israelites, and are they actually the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? There's an argument to be made there that they might not be that. A lot of folks who are Eastern European who are claiming to be Jews may be Jews by through their faith and worshiping Yahweh and reading the Torah and obeying the Torah, but are they the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? There's a question there. I do a video on the so-called Synagogue of Satan, where Jesus says that there will be certain people in the end times who claim to be Jews but are not, but are the Synagogue of Satan. Who are they? Well, if you want a deeper dive into this, you can go to my video. It's no longer on YouTube because I don't want to get banned again. You can find it on Rumble. I'll have a link to it in the show notes. In that video, I present both sides and you make your own decision. But there is that question of, who are these people? Are they the true Israelites or are they someone else? And if they are someone else, well, if you're a Christian and if they're not the people who God promised this land to and made all these promises to, you should maybe be a little wary about them. So just putting that out there. Okay, so the bottom line is that Israel, the physical nation, and the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whoever they might be, are crucial to end times prophecy. They are not irrelevant. God is not done with Israel. On the other hand, we do not have to unilaterally agree with everything that the current nation of Israel does if it does not fit with our morality or general morality. Because again, the focus right now is on the church. God is dealing with the church in this current age. Israel has not disappeared. They're in the penalty box. They still exist and they are still a part of Bible prophecy. But the main focus that God has on the world right now is the church. God is communicating and working through the world, through the church. So our goal, our objective, our aims as Christians should be to fulfill the the mandate of the church in which Jesus gave us, which is to go into all the world and make disciples of all humanity. That means preaching the gospel to them, and once they are converted, then teaching them. And God does not need our help to fulfill the prophecies that Israel will be about. Yes, there will be an end times temple. We know this because the Antichrist, who is yet to come, will set himself up in that temple to be worshiped. It will happen. That doesn't mean that we need, as Christians, we need to force it to happen through Christian Zionist efforts. I mean, if you are a rancher in Texas and you want to raise red heifers in order to have them be ready to sacrifice for that to cleanse the new temple, fine, go ahead. But that's not our call as Christians to do that. God does not need our help to bring about prophecy. As we talked about in the last Q&A, prophecy is going to occur because God designated it or the fallen Elohim have said what they're going to do and God reacts to it. And in the case of this next temple, this is something that the fallen Elohim want to happen because again, they need it for their antichrist, their coming world leader to set himself up to be worshiped in it. So it's going to happen. And again, God doesn't need our help. We should be focused on other things as Christians. So again, that's my opinion. Many people disagree with it. The Christian Zionists are going to disagree with me. The replacement theologists are going to disagree with me, and that's fine. But I'm not interested in the personal theology of people who are taking things outside of the context of the Bible. I'm concerned with what the Bible actually says. And the Bible does not diverges with both of those views. Replacement theology, where Israel is irrelevant, and Christian Zionism, where Israel is the focus of our current time on earth. Because we are in the church age. We should be focused on doing what the church is supposed to do and let God handle Israel. Israel is not the responsibility of Christians. Our responsibility is the church. Let God handle Israel, and we should be doing what the church is supposed to be doing. That's it, and that's all. All right, let's move on. So let me end this by just giving you my personal take. As I said, I'm not an expert in geopolitics. That's not my lane. But again, you probably want to know what I think about what's happening right now with us striking Iran and the possible escalation of it. Maybe they'll try to bomb the Straits of Hormuz and mess up oil prices, and then our gas prices will go up, which, great. That's going to really screw up our economy and make things worse for us. And so there are a lot of contemporary things that can happen. So what do I think we should be doing? Bottom line is, my opinion, this is just me. This is not based on my eschatology or Bible prophecy or anything like that. I don't think we have any business doing what we're doing. Now, again, personal opinion. Iran is not an imminent threat to the United States. where they were, are they enriching uranium? I guess so. I mean, there was a report out in March by Tulsi Gabbard, who, our current president put in charge of this sort of thing, and she reported to Congress that they weren't. So maybe something changed, but they've been saying this for a long time. I was looking at a video of, I think it was Netanyahu or another Israeli leader saying that Iran was like weeks away from being nuclear capable. But then I looked at the timeline, and that was said in 1995 when I was just a youngster, just in college at that time. That was a long time ago. So how are they weeks away from nuclear capability in 1995? And you keep hearing that every few years. Oh, they're weeks away. They're a few days away from having it. It seems to me like there's an agenda to just start this conflict and to cause some kind of regime change in Iran that seems to benefit the people in power and not so much the United States. We have no vested interest in this. Even if they were to become a nuclear power, which what I don't think is a good idea because they're nuts, but they don't have the ability to harm us. They don't have the ballistic missile capability to reach the United States. So should Israel be concerned? Absolutely. And Israel should do whatever they need to do as a nation to make sure that they continue to exist. But I don't think that we, the United States, should put ourselves and our troops in harm's way. I have two young boys. They're not of drafting age yet, but in 10 years they will be. I don't want my kids going into another country to fight a war that does not benefit us. I don't want my boys dying to benefit another country. I don't think that's fair. I really don't. So I think we should stay out of it. I don't think we should have gone into Iraq. I don't think we should have gone into Afghanistan. And I don't think we should be doing what we're doing in Iran. But that's my personal opinion because I don't think it benefits us. I'm not a Democrat or Republican or anything else. I am someone who believes that we should put our interests first above the interests of other nations, even if those other nations are our allies. We can support them, we can help them militarily as long as it does not harm us, but we should not be taking direct action. And again, that's my opinion. That has nothing to do with Bible prophecy. That's just me. All right, so that's really all I have to say about that. Prophetically, I've given my thoughts on that. Israel is important to Bible prophecy, but they're not infallible. They are not above reproach, and God is going to handle that. And the Gog Magog conflict, as it is presented in the Bible, does not appear to be on the current horizon based on what's happening now. Now, if things escalate and go in a different direction, well, then I reserve the right to come back here and amend what I'm saying now. But as things stand right now, we are not on the verge of the Gog Magog conflict. All right. That's it for me. Thanks for listening and watching. I appreciate it. Go to faithbyreason.net, go to patreon.com/faithbyreason in order to interact with me directly and to get bonus videos and Q&A, additional Q&As and be a part of the Bible study. So I appreciate you and I will talk to you soon.